Welcome! You're listening to the Uncharted Lancaster podcast, where we explore the hidden histories, forgotten places, and long-buried secrets of Lancaster County. Using modern digital storytelling tools, each episode brings a new piece of local lore to life, revealing the strange, the surprising, and the stories history left behind. Let's begin.
Imagine you are a farmer in central Pennsylvania or like Western New York in the early 1800s.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah. And you have just had this like absolute banner year. Your barns are bursting with grain. You're sitting on this mountain of agricultural wealth. But there is a massive, incredibly frustrating catch.
You can't actually sell it to anyone.
Exactly. You literally cannot get it to anyone who wants to buy it. Because you are completely landlocked by these terrible rutted dirt roads and, incredibly rough topography.
Right, the classic geographic trap.
Yeah. So whether you are trying to understand the history of American infrastructure or you're just wildly curious about how massive things get built against all odds, we've gathered this fascinating stack of sources: historical journals, old engineering logs, passenger diaries, even like handwritten toll sheets to custom tailor this deep dive for you.
It really is the ultimate trap for you as that farmer, though.
Yeah.
I mean, you have the goods, the demand is definitely there, but the friction of distance makes the transaction, well, mathematically impossible.
Because at this time, the nation's two absolute largest, most lucrative markets were Philadelphia and New York City.
Right.
That is where you wanted to sell. But because of those terrible roads, a Pennsylvania farmer couldn't profitably get their goods to Philly. It was actually easier to ship south to Baltimore.
Which is wild to think about.
And if you were a New York producer, you were looking north across the Canadian border to Montreal. The phrase of the era was literally, "You can't get there from here."
Which is a terrifying reality if you happen to be a merchant sitting in Philadelphia or New York.
Oh, for sure.
Your entire economic survival, your prestige, it all depends on acting as the middleman for those agricultural goods.
Mm-hmm.
If the farmers in your own state are sending their wealth to rival cities or, foreign countries, your city is going to wither.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because these Eastern merchants were facing this existential threat, they didn't just compete on prices, right? They started physically attacking each other's geography. And our mission today is to follow that dramatic boom and bust arc of American canal construction in the 1800s. We're going to look at the initial engineering triumphs that completely reshaped rural America and then contrast them with the fierce arrival of the railroads that eventually drove almost all of these artificial rivers into total obsolescence.
That desperation you mentioned, it's exactly what sparked this fierce city versus city rivalry. It's the friction that launched the great canal mania of the 1830s.
Right.
To understand the boom, we really have to look at the bitter rivalries that funded the digging in the first place.
Yeah, just look at what Philadelphia did to Baltimore. The census of 1830 drops and Baltimore's population sneaks past Philadelphia.
A huge blow to their ego.
A massive blow. They take the number 2 spot behind New York City, and they actually hold on to it until 1860. And Philadelphia merchants cannot abide this lack of access to their own in-state farmers. So they decide to literally alter the geography of the East Coast.
Just change the map.
Right. By taking the fight directly to Baltimore's turf. Between 1824 and 1828, Pennsylvanians financed and cut a 14-mile canal right across the Delmarva Peninsula, cutting straight through northern Maryland and Delaware.
Right, the Chesapeake and Delaware Canal, or the C&D.
Yeah.
And the entire point of this was to steal access to the agricultural output of places like Cecil County, Maryland, and funnel it straight up the Delaware River to Philly.
Just digging a massive trench through your neighbor's yard to steal their business.
Pretty much.
And initially, the source letters show the Baltimore merchants were absolutely livid about that.
Oh, they were furious. But the historical record also shows that anger evaporated almost immediately.
Really?
Yeah. Baltimore merchants very quickly realized this new waterway actually benefited them too. It streamlined shipping so dramatically that everyone's profits went up. And historically speaking, altering that specific peninsula wasn't even a new idea. A man named Augustine Herman. He was Maryland's first naturalized citizen and the cartographer who created the first accurate map of the Chesapeake Bay. He had actually proposed a Delmarva Canal way back in the 1600s.
Wait, the 1600s, which is centuries ahead of his time.
Exactly. He was likely inspired by France's Languedoc Canal, which was, the greatest canal built in Europe during his lifetime. The geography just made sense. Sailing all the way around the peninsula between Baltimore and Philadelphia was this long, circuitous nightmare.
Right, going all the way down and back up.
Yeah, and the land across the peninsula was relatively flat, probed by these wide creeks. But back in Herman's day, Americans simply did not possess the engineering knowledge or the labor force to build something like that.
Which brings us to the blockbuster triumph of this era, the project that forced Americans to figure out that engineering, the Erie Canal.
The big one.
The origin story of the Erie Canal is wild. It was proposed in 1807 by a New York flour merchant named Jesse Hawley. And when you read Hawley's story, he sounds exactly like a modern tech startup founder, except, and this is the crazy part, he's pitching a billion-dollar company from bankruptcy court.
That is a highly accurate parallel.
Hawley wrote these incredibly detailed newspaper articles proposing a massive canal linking the Hudson River all the way to Lake Erie, which would, funnel farm products from the newly opening Midwest straight into New York City, completely cutting out rival Eastern ports.
Right.
But he wrote these proposals under the pen name Hercules because he was literally sitting in debtor's prison. He had been financially ruined by the exorbitant cost of overland freight. Like he was living the very problem he was trying to solve.
And just like any disruptive innovation, his idea faced massive, entrenched opposition. Land speculators in Western New York loved it, obviously, because it would skyrocket their property values. But farmers in New York's southern tier were furious because the proposed route completely bypassed them. And the wealthy leaders in New York City actively opposed funding a trade route out into what they saw as the rural hinterlands. They had grown wealthy on Atlantic, ocean-facing commerce.
Yeah, the Gothamites only came around later once the first sections opened and they actually saw the insane profits rolling in. But getting it built was just a political nightmare. You had guys like Gouverneur Morris who literally signed the Constitution, lending his prestige to the Canal Commission.
But he actively slowed progress down.
Right, because he kept insisting they could build this massive, hundreds of miles long canal without using locks, which is structurally absurd when you look at the elevation changes between the Hudson River and Lake Erie.
It defied the basic laws of physics and water flow. You cannot have a sloping river of that length without creating a raging current that boats could ever travel up. But the project was ultimately saved by DeWitt Clinton. He was from this prominent political family, and he championed the Erie Canal to sort of reverse his own dimming political fortunes. He realized that if the federal government wasn't going to help, New York State had to fund and run it themselves.
Which was a massive gamble.
It was, but it catapulted him to the governorship.
Though he did miss out on the White House, apparently because of his, quote, patrician self-involvement and iffy sense of political strategy.
Yeah, historians are pretty clear on that.
But his gamble worked, and the federal government staying out of it highlights a huge geographical lesson here. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, these absolute heavyweights, they desperately wanted a Western Canal route for their native Virginia to make it the gateway to the West.
Right. They wanted to use the Potomac River corridor for the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal, for the CNO.
Yeah.
But geography dictates destiny. The terrain along the Potomac was simply too rocky, too steep, and just too challenging to carve a waterway through with early 19th century technology. The CNO never even made it west of Maryland. Virginia lost the race entirely to New York and Pennsylvania.
Wow. So the Erie Canal gets built 1817 to 1825, and the resulting boom is staggering. It turns Rochester into the Flower City. It takes Buffalo, which was just a forgettable lakeside village, and turns it into a massive hub.
What's fascinating here is...
And Nathaniel Hawthorne. He observed that the canal water was, quote, the most fertilizing of all fluids because it caused these massive towns of brick and stone, churches, theaters, and luxury to just spring up instantly out of the wilderness.
It was an economic explosion. But to achieve that, politicians had to overcome a very stark reality, which is that Americans in the early 1800s literally did not know how to build canals.
At all.
Basically, no. The only notable prior effort in the U.S. was the 27-mile Middlesex Canal in Massachusetts, and that was mostly used to generate water power.
Right, so they are staring at a proposed route of over 350 miles through raw, heavily timbered wilderness with zero trained civil engineers in the country. How do you dig a 350-mile trench without dynamite or steam shovels?
You learn on the job. The Erie Canal effectively birthed American civil engineering. Surveyors like John Randall, Nathan Roberts, Canvas White, and Benjamin Wright were literally figuring out the math as they dug.
That's wild.
To clear the forest, they had to invent massive stump pullers, these giant horse-drawn wheels that could rip full tree roots out of the earth. For the digging, they developed specialized animal-drawn scrapers, and they were playing a frantic game of catch-up. The British had a head start of several decades on advanced building materials and lock design.
Yeah, let's talk about those locks, because Gouverneur Morris clearly didn't understand them. How does a lock actually lift a heavy cargo boat over a mountain?
Okay, think of it as an underwater staircase. You pull a boat into a watertight stone chamber, shut the heavy wooden gates behind it, and then open a valve from the water source above. Gravity fills the chamber, lifting the boat vertically, almost like a toy in a bathtub, until it's level with the next section of the canal. Then you open the front gates, and the boat glides out.
But to do that, you need waterproof mortar. If you build a stone chamber that is constantly being pressurized with water, normal mortar just dissolves and washes away. You need a hydraulic cement that actually cures and hardens while it's submerged.
Exactly.
And importing England's famous Portland cement would have bankrupted the project.
It would have. Without hydraulic cement, the entire canal system fails. But a procurement agent for the Erie Canal named Andrew Bartow started experimenting, and he actually invented a formula for hydraulic cement that could be manufactured using local New York materials.
So he figures out this crucial formula, and then he sells the patent rights to one of the surveyors, Canvas White. Though the tragic punchline in the logs is that the canal ended up using about 24 different local cement suppliers, and almost none of them ever bothered to pay White his royalties.
A harsh lesson in early intellectual property.
Right.
But beyond the materials, the Erie Canal revolutionized American project management. Instead of forming one gigantic, centralized corporation to hire a massive labor force, they pioneered the idea of divvying the canal route into small contracts and awarding them to the local farmers whose land the canal was crossing.
Which is brilliant politics. Like, if I'm a farmer who was mad about the canal cutting through my land, but now the state is paying me to dig that section, I'm suddenly a huge supporter.
Exactly. It aided efficiency and injected cash directly into local economies. But digging a canal is incredibly labor-intensive. A single project might employ up to 5,000 workers at a time, and a key detail in the ledgers is how they were paid. They were given set daily or weekly wages rather than piece rates based on how much dirt they actually moved.
Yeah, I was reading about this, and the math on those piece rates just didn't work. If you're a contractor trying to measure exactly how many cubic yards of dirt a specific guy with a shovel moved in a 14-hour shift, it's an accounting nightmare.
Right.
Set wages were really the only scalable way to run a 5,000-man workforce.
Plus, the workers themselves despised piece rates. They viewed them as a tool for exploitation, basically a way for bosses to constantly move the goalposts and cheat them out of pay.
And who were these workers? The sources mention German and Welsh settlers, enslaved people on the few southern canals. But the iconic image is the young, single, unskilled Irish immigrant. We constantly hear stories about rowdy, heavy-drinking, brawling canal workers. But when you actually read the historical accounts of the violence, it rarely looks like mindless tavern brawling. It looks incredibly calculated.
That requires essential nuance, yeah. Violence certainly happened, but when riots or strikes broke out, they were almost always highly organized efforts. They were fighting against unpaid wages, or they were engaged in fierce turf wars.
Turf wars.
Yes. In America, these young Irish men formed tight cliques based on the specific counties they came from back in Ireland. The violence was actually organized groups trying to secure exclusive jobs for their own county men and keep rival cliques out. It was really about economic survival.
It was a completely unique micro-society. And once these artificial rivers were filled with water, they created an incredibly complex economic system. Nowhere was that more evident than in Pennsylvania. Like, New York had the Erie, but Pennsylvania quietly built out the nation's absolute largest canal network.
Right, because Pennsylvania's geography is defined by rivers like the Susquehanna, the Schuylkill, and the Lehigh. But these rivers were incredibly shallow, choked with rocks, and just unnavigable for long distances. You couldn't move freight on them.
So they just bypassed them.
Basically. The state built canals that simply paralleled these useless rivers, utilizing the conducive topography of the river valleys and siphoning off their abundant water to fill the canal channels.
And their initial motivation wasn't even agriculture. It was coal. They needed a way to transport heavy anthracite coal down to Philadelphia, arriving right in the nick of time to fuel the American Industrial Revolution. The economics of moving this stuff is mind-bending. We pulled a surviving toll sheet from the Pennsylvania Mainline Canal from 1866, and it wasn't just based on weight, it was calculated based on space and bulk.
The geometry of early accounting.
Right. Some clerk is sitting there with a quill pen calculating this. Moving a ton of corn, rye, oats, or hay cost 8 cents per ton per 5 miles. But if you wanted to move a ton of flour, fish, potatoes, or fruit, that jumped to 10 cents.
And the craziest part.
Oh, shipping a ton of feathers costs an absolute fortune because a ton of feathers takes up a massive amount of physical space on the boat compared to a ton of dense coal.
It really highlights the extreme physical constraints of the boats themselves. And, the physical reality of traveling on those boats is just as split.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When you look at the passenger diaries we pulled, it is literally two different worlds. On one hand, you have the famous English novelist Charles Dickens. He took a tour of America, and his diary paints a picture of total luxury.
Oh, he loved it.
He treated the canal boat like America's first cruise ship. He's lounging on the deck in near total silence, enjoying a massive spread of food like salmon, shad, liver, pickles, black pudding, just watching the wilderness glide by faster and infinitely smoother than a bone-rattling stagecoach.
It was idyllic for Dickens, but gentle ladies of the era often complained bitterly about being crammed into these tight, dirty quarters below deck with people from lower social classes.
Yeah.
And the speed was strictly regulated. The limit was between 4 and 10 miles per hour. If a massive boat went any faster, it would create a wake, and those waves would literally erode and destroy the earthen banks of the canal.
Which is exactly why they didn't use steam engines. They used draft animals walking on a towpath next to the water, pulling the boat with a long rope. And they preferred mules over horses because mules could endure grueling 18-hour workdays.
Tough animals.
Very. They were driven by young boys and swapped out every 15 miles. But for Dickens, trying to eat his black pudding on the roof, there was a major catch. He was in constant danger of being decapitated.
Oh.
Every time they approached one of the hundreds of low bridges crossing the canal, the crew screams, "Low bridge!" And you have to instantly throw yourself flat on the deck to avoid getting knocked into the water.
Not exactly relaxing.
No. And think about the choreography required here. You have two massive boats, some up to 120 feet long, approaching each other from opposite directions. Both are being pulled by ropes attached to mules on the same shore. How do they not just tangle the ropes and crash?
It was actually an elegant solution. One boat would steer to the outside and deliberately let its tow rope go completely slack, dropping it down deep into the water.
Okay.
The other boat would then glide directly over the sunken rope. Once clear, the first boat's mules would pull their line taut again and carry on.
That's brilliant. But that logistical nightmare was about to get much worse because the massive financial success of the Erie Canal and the Pennsylvania coal lines sparked an absolute nationwide frenzy. Every town in America saw the wealth flowing into Buffalo and Rochester, and they demanded their own canal.
And this is where Maney leads to the bust. We see severe overexpansion. States were politically pressured to build unprofitable slide routes, these like spurs, just to appease local voters who felt bypassed by the main lines. It completely overextended the financial networks of several states, leading to massive boondoggles.
Yeah, the ultimate disaster of this era has to be Indiana's Wabash and Erie Canal. This thing was a monster. At 468 miles, it was considered the longest canal ever constructed in human history outside of China's Grand Canal. It stretched diagonally across the entire, barely settled state of Indiana.
It was a catastrophe of ambition, honestly. Financed using strategies bordering on outright fraud. It bled money from day one, and the human cost was horrific. During construction, a massive cholera outbreak swept through the camps, killing 150 workers.
And the public reaction to that outbreak is fascinating. The locals living near the canal were so terrified that the canal's stagnant reservoirs were causing the disease that they formed these vigilante groups called the reservoir regulators. They literally went out and intentionally destroyed the dams, breaching the reservoirs. It's exactly like the people burning down 5G cell towers today because they think the towers cause viruses. It's sheer infrastructure panic.
It's a perfect parallel. The cholera was real, but they misidentified the vector. Because of that destruction, Indiana had to completely abandon over 100 miles of the canal between Terre Haute and Evansville.
Wow.
To be fair, the surviving sections did succeed in moving Indiana wheat, pork, and tobacco, and they did encourage settlement. But financially, it was ruinous. By 1860, the United States had built over 4,200 miles of canals, and already 350 miles of that had been completely abandoned.
So why did this massive nation-altering infrastructure suddenly start failing so quickly?
Because canals had three massive inherent vulnerabilities. First, they required staggering amounts of nearby water to keep them filled, which just evaporated during droughts.
Makes sense.
Second, to overcome changes in elevation, they relied on a multitude of those slow, cumbersome locks, which caused massive traffic jams. And third, and most fatal in the North winter.
Oh, the ice.
Right. When the water froze, the entire transportation network of the United States simply shut down for months to prevent ice from destroying the banks or stranding the boats.
And they were victims of their own success, too. By the 1840s and 50s, there were so many canals competing for business that agricultural freight rates plummeted. They were moving flour for less than 2 cents per ton mile. That is an absolute dream for you as a farmer, but it bankrupts the canal operators.
And right at this moment of vulnerability, a superior technology arrives, the railroad. The contrast between the two is stark. Consider the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal again. Wedged into that narrow, mountainous Potomac Valley, the canal builders spent 14 agonizing years just trying to blast and dig a single 3,100-foot tunnel, the Pawpaw Tunnel, through crumbly slate rock.
14 years. By the time you finish digging a tunnel for 14 years, the entire technological landscape of the country has shifted. You're building a state-of-the-art blockbuster for an audience that has already moved on.
Exactly. By the time the C&O Canal finally reached its destination in Cumberland, Maryland, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad had already been sitting there waiting for 8 years.
Ouch.
The train simply bypassed the delays. The Iron Horse didn't freeze in winter, it didn't need a massive reservoir, and it didn't need to crawl at 4 miles an hour so it wouldn't erode the earthen banks. The competition was so fierce that Pennsylvania started abandoning and selling off its massive canal network before the Civil War even started.
The speed of the obsolescence is just staggering. Almost all of these inland canals just died out, turning into muddy ditches. But there is a twist in the source material because one of the very first canals we talked about actually survived by mutating to fit the times.
The Chesapeake and Delaware Canal.
Right. Because it was short, only 14 miles, and because it connected two major ocean ports, Philadelphia and Baltimore, it found a way to live on.
It adapted. In the 1920s, the Army Corps of Engineers took it over. They looked at the fatal flaws of canals and just eliminated them. They removed the slow locks entirely, turning it into a sea-level canal, and they significantly widened and deepened it. As ocean freighters grew larger, they widened it again in the 1960s.
And the labor force shifted with it. The local museum logs show that during that 1960s widening, the descendants of the old Irish crews were replaced by Ukrainian Americans coming down from Pennsylvania to do the heavy machinery work. Today, that canal is an absolute behemoth. It's 460 feet wide, 35 feet deep, and carries 40% of all the ship traffic going in and out of the Port of Baltimore.
But that survival came at a steep, tragic cost for the locals.
Yeah, there's a town there called Chesapeake City, right on the canal. When the Army Corps widened the waterway, they literally shaved off entire streets of the town.
Just gone.
And when they removed the locks, ships no longer had to stop and wait. So all the local taverns, the boarding houses, the businesses that catered to the waiting sailors, they all died overnight. Progress drove right through their living room and didn't even tap the brakes.
And then came the ultimate blow during World War II. A large ship lost control. It was a German-built boat, which sparked rumors of sabotage, but it was really just an accident, and it crashed into and destroyed the bridge connecting the two halves of Chesapeake City.
And because of wartime shortages of steel and labor, they couldn't rebuild that bridge until 1949. The town was physically cut in half for years.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, though, Chesapeake City represents the resilience of these spaces. In the 1970s, a member of the DuPont family spearheaded a historic preservation effort and revived the town. Today, it has a population of about 750 people, and it thrives on tourism.
The museum director noted that patrons at the waterfront restaurants sit there eating dinner while these absolutely colossal ocean freighters squeeze through the canal, looking like they're going to crash into the new bridge at any second. It's become a spectator sport. So let's recap this incredible arc for you. We went from that 14-mile C&D trench dug to steal farm goods to the Erie Canal's explosion of wealth that literally birthed American civil engineering to a massive 4,200-mile national network.
A huge boom.
And then, almost overnight, it was entirely usurped by the railroads. So what does this all mean? Canaling never truly left America's blood. Teddy Roosevelt pushed for the ultimate canal in Panama in 1903. We still sing the Erie Canal song in elementary school. And just in 2021, the bipartisan infrastructure law poured $17 billion into waterways and ports. The footprint is permanent.
It is permanent. But I want to leave you with a profound historical irony to ponder. The greatest economic triumph of those inland canals was establishing eastern Pennsylvania as the absolute powerhouse of the early Industrial Revolution.
Right.
By moving all that heavy anthracite coal and raw iron so efficiently, eastern PA became the largest iron-producing region in the United States up until 1870. It laid the very foundation for Pittsburgh to become the Steel City.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Think about what they were actually moving on those waters. By efficiently transporting all that coal and iron, the canals were literally providing the raw, heavy materials needed to forge the locomotives and forge the steel tracks that would inevitably destroy the canal business forever.
Wow.
They built their own executioner. So I ask you, look around at today's massive tech and infrastructure booms. What modern marvel are we pouring billions into right now that is secretly just providing the raw materials for the very invention that will make it entirely obsolete?
It's like building the massive AI server farms that eventually design the technology that renders those same server farms completely inefficient. It always loops back. Just like that farmer in the early 1800s staring at a mountain of grain, sometimes the solution to "you can't get there from here" ends up taking you somewhere you never expected to go.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Uncharted Lancaster podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating or review wherever you listen. It really helps more people discover the show. For more fascinating local history, visit unchartedlancaster.com. And if you'd like to go deeper, check out one of Adam Zern's books at unchartedlancaster.com/books. Until next time, keep exploring.